trait?
John Vervaeke, I have been looking forward to having this conversation for God knows how long. I've been listening to your work. It's amazing. Your body of work is outstanding. And I have to thank Matt for putting me into you and now getting in touch with you to be on my podcast. But as I like to start off, John, just for, kickers, who is John Vervaeke?
Well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Who is John Vervaeke? That's interesting. And I don't mean to sound like a character from a teenage angst movie, but that's very much in question for me right now. I think in a good way. As I mentioned to you before we began, I just returned from I think what is I can properly call a pilgrimage. That's what it was intended to be, and that's what it's becoming, the philosophical Silk Road, to try and be properly responsible to the advent of the sacred, the way the sacred is trying to show up in new ways for us as a response to the meaning crisis. And that, as a pilgrimage should do, has, challenged me as to, uh, uh, you know, who fundamentally am I? Now that can be narcissistic and ridiculous, and I have no doubt that there's elements of that in me because I'm not a saint or a sage. But I do think it's fair to say that the pilgrimage did nurture a Socratic part of me that's asking that question very deeply. So, I mean, I can give you the standard facts. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. I do work on the nature of meaning and mindfulness and mystical states and flow and intelligence and rationality and consciousness. So that's sort of my shtick. And then my public work has been around trying to address the meaning crisis, which is, in a nutshell, the vacuum that has been left in our culture and in our cognition, perhaps even in our consciousness, by the retreat of a shared sacred canopy, a shared sacred framework. I'm not advocating for some simplistic, nostalgic return, but the point I'm making, not just me, lots of people are making, is when we chose to disenfranchise from religious institutions for a lot of very good reasons, we kind of threw out a very important and functional baby with that bathwater. And we've been trying to fill that hole with politics and with popular art and popular music, and also more noxious things like conspirituality and all kinds of things. And so that is eroding at our mental health. It's causing loneliness, fragmentation, collapse in trust, collapse in a sense of connectedness. And so um, I'm trying to make people aware of that, try to bring the best of the cognitive science to bear on that, the best philosophical reflection, with the help of other people, created an ecology of practices to help people individually and collectively address that. And then, like I said, I've committed myself to trying to be in service, try to amplify, try to, helpfully, strengthen the signal for the way that people are in many ways being drawn together towards a new way of relating to what's ultimate and how it can be sacred and transformative for them, as a way of trying to get us out of the meaning crisis. And so that's who I am. I'm sort of caught up in that. And I think this is such a deep and pervasive and profound issue. It requires something profound from us. And it's not the kind of thing where you can have a merely theoretical knowledge. You have to put yourself through it if you're going to have any deep knowledge of it. So that's what
Mm,
I'm doing. That's what I'm undergoing.
your pilgrimage. There are many things that I want to relate into that, but maybe just pick up on this idea of the pilgrimage, John, as from my vantage, much less academic, but in every one of my books, the notion of meaningfulness has
Hmm.
been pregnant within it, whether it's about the meaningful life and death of my grandfather in the Second World War, putting meaningfulness into tech, and or being a meaningful leader. So it's something that I've been exploring, but very from much from a different angle. And one of my observations, we've talked about, you mentioned this idea of we've chosen to walk away from spirit or religiousness or religion. But I also feel like, especially for men and boys, we've walked away from having a moment of becoming man. And
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering to what extent that resonated with you, and to what extent maybe a pilgrimage like the one you're doing, or maybe others doing the Camino de Compostela, what sort of processions we can have that will help us return to some sense of meaning as men.
I think that's right. I think one of the most important philosophical questions, and so I'm going to, and I mean, I intend to what I say to be taken that way, is what is it to be a good man above and beyond being a good person? There is, of course, the important question, what is it to be a good person? And we all share that. But there is also a particular question about what it is to be a good man. Women, of course, and I'm not saying that women haven't had tremendous disadvantages. I'm just pointing out something right now. Women have a philosophical movement, feminism, for all its, criticisms. It also performs a very valuable function of constantly bringing up this question and addressing it with a lot of, deep reflective thought. What is it to be a good woman above and beyond being a good person? Men don't have the equivalent of that. They don't have a culturally, promoted movement that is about raising that question. Now, I understand what some women might say that that's because men dominated just what it was to be a person, and I agree with that. I agree that we should have separated those questions. What is it to be a man from what is it to be a person? I agree. I'm not disputing that, but that doesn't mean that question, what is it to be a good man, above and beyond being a good person, doesn't need to be raised and addressed. And I think that is properly one of the most important questions of our time, because one of the important aspects of meaning, of the meaning crisis, is that men are bereft of that kind of identification that properly takes into account our biological agency, our particular mindedness in our selfhood, and the way we enter in as persons to our community. What does being a man mean in a community? Um, uh, the models we have of what a man should be on popular media very rarely have to do with, what is, how to enter into community. They're very much heroic, the heroic, right? And that's the only myth that's being offered to people, the hero that goes out and fights the dragon. That's very problematic. And it's, of course, it's degraded considerably in popular culture. So I think that question, sorry, I'm going on about it, Mentor, but I think that's a really important question. And I think we need to be raising it in slow, careful, reflective dialogos, because if not, the question is not going to remain unanswered, but what we're going to get are basically popular cultural answers that are at best nostalgic and misplaced, and at worst manipulative of us in profound ways. And a lot of young men are being manipulated by all kinds of things. Now, on the other hand, you see that for, I think, the first time in measurable history, that men are starting to exceed women in terms of religious participation. Men are sort of leading the charge of some of the return to some of the legacy religions, because I think they're starting to, for me, that's a sign of hope that this question is being raised properly. Now, to your question specifically, yes, I think that the issues of pilgrimage and spiritual, philosophical, psychological initiation are central to what it is to become a man. I think part of what is happening in me. It sounds like a silly thing to say for somebody who's had kids and is, 60, 63. But part of what the philosophical Silk Road did for me is to actually raise that question. And here's the one thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet again, but we have to give up the idea that we get done at some point. The ancient idea, as the child is to the adult is to the sage. And I think, you know, there are multiple periods of initiations. We need to have a necklace of such pearls, and they need to all speak to each other in a resonant way. And I think part of what pilgrimage does is recall and remind of us of to earlier callings to initiation, and also set us aspirationally towards the current initiation that is needed by us and for us.
what that makes me think about your connection of pearls is the lack of intergenerational mixing that's
Mhm.
now happened, so that you don't have grandpa or grandma living in the house with the grandchildren, or even more like they used to, especially when there were many more children. And we on top of that, we don't have this notion of service to community.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
it seems to be all focused about me, eventually an extension of me, my family. Since I only have one or two kids, I put everything of value into them. And in that process of parenting, then we lose ourselves, and or at least we think we're promoting ourselves, but we tend to lose ourselves thinking that this is we're being of service. And ultimately we've what I feel is that we've lost this idea of belonging to a
Mhm.
bigger cause without it having to be sort of Gandhi-esque. Can we not return to maybe even national service or other things where we show that man must be subservient to some kind of bigger thing, or must be, I don't know, but could be subservient to some bigger thing?
I think that's fundamentally right. I think that this is of the scientific work on the psychology of meaning, of which I have scientific and philosophical critiques. Nevertheless, there's also good theoretical and empirical work. One of the main factors that contributes, well, two of them, and this is part of the problem. They're in two separate sub disciplines in psychology that should be talking to each other and aren't really talking to each other. One, it's called mattering, which is a sense of being connected to something, as you said, larger than yourself. We have to return to that metaphor because obviously it's a metaphor. If I chain you to an ocean liner, you're not really satisfied with your life. And then the other one is belonging. That's largely the work of Kelly Allen and her colleagues. Um, I think these are two sides of the same coin. This is part of what's called the jingle jangle problem in psychology. I think they're two different names for the same phenomena,
Mm.
slightly different emphases, but I think but they point to this need to be connected to something larger than ourselves. And what this means, I think, is the following. Now, I could give you a larger, you know, more complex argument, but I'm going to just sort of try to intuitively gesture towards it. Um, think about think about some of the metaphors that have been used for a sudden sense of a deeper sense of belonging or connectedness to the world, like enlightening or awakening. Well, think about what happens when you awaken. You're in a dream, and the dream is this little world, and it's very self-contained and very self-referential. And then you wake up to a bigger picture that right, a more encompassing framework, and you have an asymmetry of sense making. This bigger picture can make sense of the smaller picture and not vice versa. And because of that, you realize how the smaller one was biased, self-deceptive, egocentric. And I mean, it may give you useful information. I'm not sort of slagging Jung here or anything like that, but you realize, oh, this is the real world and that's the dream world. What I'm saying to you is this sense of meaning as mattering and belonging is also connected to the sense of being connected to something that's real, that wakes us up, that matures us. If what we mean by maturity, which is what I think we mean by maturity, this is John Verussen's work, is the ability to face reality in a better and better way. And you can think, well, why would that matter so much to us? Because everything you value and do depends on it being real and you genuinely realizing its reality and its relevance. This is to say something the ancients kept saying, which we don't, by the way, which is there's a deep connection between the cultivation of meaningfulness and the cultivation of wisdom, the ability to wake up, to move from being completely egocentric, to overcome bias, to overcome self-deception in a systematic and systemic way. And this goes towards something like the following. I'll ask my students, you've perhaps heard me tell this, but I do it. How many of you are on deeply committed romantic relationships that you're finding really satisfying? and a certain number put up their hands, because this is our replacement, as you said, for God and history and intergenerational culture and large, socioeconomic cultural projects. What we'll do is we'll find the one, right? And of course, no person can bear this. But then I asked them, how many of you would want to know if your partner was cheating on you, even if that meant the complete and utter destruction of this satisfying relationship? And 99% of them put up their hand. I always talk later to the 1% who don't, and there's usually some. And then I asked the 99, well, why do you want to know that if it's going to destroy something that you're enjoying so much? And they forget all the postmodern stuff and all the cynicism. They say, well, because it wouldn't be real. It wouldn't be real. And this is, I think, one of Plato's great insights. There's deep connections between meaningfulness, realization in both senses of the word, maturation. And that's why, for me, I've been trying to argue for a deep connection between meaning and waking up, and let me put this all together, meaning and wise waking up.
In your book, Origins, which is, I must say, at the very beginning, I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, John. It was so far back, and a lot of heavy stuff. But the more I got into it, the more I started getting turned on and starting needing to go back to it and reread pieces and dive in. And I've now spoken about it to many people because I think it fundamentally wakens up a lot of things about how we've got to here. Uh, uh, I'm going to guess, or at least I believe, because I mean, I'm not fully, compass mentis on everything you write and are saying, but that you're in this regard of detachment from reality. We're talking about the disembedding. That
Yes.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
is
Yes,
that
yeah.
that's totally related?
Yeah, very much. I mean, uh, what we did. So yeah, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Origins. Thank you for the book club. And notice it's called Awakening. That's deliberate, given what I was just talking about. That this is not a matter of getting just some new theoretical beliefs. This is a matter of an individual collective transformation that is needed. Um,
Presumably, it doesn't mean being woke either.
no, 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 no. I mean, that would be one of my that's one of my sort of diagnosis, a symptom of a maladaptive, an unhealthy response to the meaning crisis is the attempt to make the political arena the place that will give us what we're looking for. And the political arena is exactly the wrong place. It frames everything in the wrong way, in a profound. Not that politics aren't important, but politics isn't the right place to try and solve this kind of problem. Um, so uh, please remind me of the question you
Getting
asked.
back to disembedding.
Oh yes, disembedding. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah. So when we did what Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher, had a huge influence on me, continues to, calls the Great Disembedding, we moved out a particular way in which we were very much like deeply participatory in the natural world. We moved to a model for a lot of very good reasons, which I call a two-world mythology, which is this world that we're in is a world that is in some sense decadent, fallen, illusory, because it's the world of it's the world that is beset by all of that self-deception, all of that illusion and delusion, all that mendacity and manipulation, and so it's a world of violence and suffering and ignorance and anger and hatred. And you can see this across all of the legacy religions. They're wrestling with this, and they posit an alternative. Right, which is what happens if we cultivate wisdom, is we can wake up from that individual and collective self-deception, and we can come to be in relationship to the real world and live as we really ought to with each other. And this, of course, is heaven or nirvana or being one with the Tao and things like that. Now, this is powerful. And this is where we get notions of transcendence, going up and over the mountain and things like that. This is powerful and it's important. The problem is that we then bound like the legacy religions and the project of wisdom cultivation and meaning cultivation is bound to this particular model of reality. Um, And that model has collapsed. That model has collapsed because of what happened in the, in the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution, such that for many people, that the idea of another world seems scientifically implausible, and it seems to just be now a way of engaging in fantasy or escapism. Um,
Mm.
and the problem with that is, and this was Nietzsche's great critique, is if you think of this world as somehow decadent and only important as a springboard to the real world, and then you lose the sense of the real world, you're then stuck in this world from which we have been deeply disembedded and which we regard as having no intrinsic value or function and is ultimately not real. And that's kind of where we are at. I hope that answered your question.
Well, it does, and in the end of the way, and it sparks a few more ideas, John, because I'm far less well read, but it does also bring up, I feel, notions of the alienation that
Yes,
Marx would talk about,
yes,
alienated from their existence, from work, and as soon as you're alienated from the only existence you have, or then if there's no choice or option for something bigger, better, it just seems like a grind down, especially as we've gone from the Enlightenment, which in all sense of proportion probably brought lots of great things.
it did. Yeah,
However, it tended to focus on or give higher value to the individual. And as we've gone down this slippery slope, hit the 60s, liberty and the individual with only two children, one children, 1.4 in Europe, we've we sort of we're whittling it down.
hmm,
And it seems like it's not very fertile ground anymore to come back.
I agree. Chris Master Pietro and I, we,
Co-author.
yeah, co-author, we talk about, and also Madeline, we had a lot of help from Madeline Abraham. Um, uh, we talk about alienation. Thing about Marx is an attempt to render purely politically, economically Hegel's vision, and Hegel's vision, explicitly, by the way, is an attempt to somehow integrate what was the grand sacred vision given to us by uh, you know, the Judeo-Christian and Greek heritage, integrate that into a post-European Enlightenment world. That's what Hegel is. So this is why Marx, it's what I call a pseudo-religious ideology. It's a grand attempt, as totalitarianism always is, to do the comprehensive functioning, the sacred canopy and guidance. And that's why, of course, it can be so incredibly bloodthirsty in some ways. Doesn't mean the critique isn't important, but I would add to alienation a couple of other A's. One is absurdity, the sense that reality is fundamentally absurd, and that can either be a sense of it being sort of weirdly surreal, or it can be weirdly irreal. People, they sort of bounce around. That overlaps, of course, with a lot of mental health issues, as you can imagine. And then that overlaps with another A, which is addiction, which is not like a disease. It is a disorder of learning in the domain of meaning and belonging. That's what addiction really is. And then you also have anxiety, both the psychological one, which is spiking, and you also have the existential one, in which you have that sort of nameless sense around the penumbra of your experience that things aren't right. Things aren't right. And that shows up, all these show up in, the increased sense of burnout that vacillates noxiously with boredom. We vacillate between boredom and burnout. We feel there's so much bullshit, and I use that in a technical sense.
Mhm.
Um, um, and so I think it's all of those A's and all of them, and this is exactly to your point, bespeak the fact that we think, in fact, so if you interview people, oh yeah, my life is meaningful because they have a couple of connections and a couple of projects. but they don't address these deeper issues of waking up, of overcoming self-deception, of having something we can share. Look, meaning has to be shared or it's not meaning. There's no such thing as a purely private meaning. It doesn't make any sense. Because meaning is a praise word. When I say your life is meaningful, I'm praising it, I'm recommending it, which means it's meeting some standard or failing to meet some standard. And we have to be able to criticize each other and correct each other. But we have this notion, like you said, we're so autonomous. This is the watchword of the Enlightenment. I'm autonomous. I'm completely self-governing. I decide. I decide. Well, you can't, right? Imagine if I started using words that had no shared meaning. Nobody could understand me. And I couldn't even understand past versions of myself. Like, and so we're in this state where we are deeply disconnected. We're cocooning and trying to hang on desperately to, well, this is my, like you said, here's my little cocoon and bubble. I don't trust anybody. Massive trust collapse. I'm not connected to anything big, intergenerational. I try to sometimes connect by consuming political stuff and getting all upset about it, but that's just an emotional thing. I'm not really making a difference. I feel insignificant. I feel like I don't, so I desperately cling for any kind of story that will make me feel like I have some significance or matter. Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's exactly it.
This is very much the topic of my new writing, which is the Avatar Trap, and how we grab onto causes or other identities and attribute an external extrinsic meaning
Yep.
which doesn't come from within, and that is the detachment that I tend to focus on, because people are running after illusory dragons to slay in their cause running. It's illusory only because it's really not germane to their deeper sense. And,
That's right.
and without having done the harder work, the pilgrimage that you're talking about, which people don't want to do, because what it actually includes is meeting the bad side of who
Yes.
you are, accepting that you have foibles. And rather than labeling it as a disease that you can get a pill for, you actually just have to say, oh, that is me.
Yes. I think that's right. And I think this is also part of the problem with the Enlightenment, especially Kant, but you can see it in Descartes. I think, therefore I am, of the autonomous, isolated atomic self, the autonomous atomic self, atomic in the sense of, isolated unto itself, not in the like nuclear power or something.
Nuclear, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's right. We so we have the notion of that our self is something that we possess, that we have to be true to. This is why we have really warped the notion of authenticity. If you think about how Heidegger talks about it and how we talk about it, it's this strange, bizarro version of what Heidegger's talking about. What you're talking about, he's talking about facing up to your mortality, facing up in the ways in which you give away your agency. Um, so I think that's right. I think that what we're doing is uh, we are we have lost the Socratic notion that our true self is something we become through aspiration and the cultivation of virtue. Instead, it is a possession we protect and advertise about by adopting various, as you said, external strategies that are basically markers of the true self that we are. And that we're being true to by advertising this identity that we possess. And of course, that's not the nature of the self. The self is your it's at three levels: your agency, your selfhood, and personhood. And these are all intrinsically, inherently dynamical, relational, and therefore inherently aspirational. And aspiration means you want to become other than you are by deeply facing who you are. Right? Like genuine education, which is not just the consumption of information. Educe meant to draw out. That's actually what it meant. Educe, right? It's like, no, no, no. You see it in the Socratic dialogues. Let's who do you think you are? Who do you think your identity is? Let's call it into question and let's midwife you so you can give birth to the self that you are not yet. This is the notion we've lost. And I think, if I'm understanding you, Minter, that's what one of the things you're emphasizing in your new book is that stop shopping for an identity. It is not that's a modal confusion. You don't have an identity. You become someone, and the only way you properly become a self is dynamically, relationally by maturation. And that means facing up to the reality without and within and how they relate to each other. I totally agree with you. Sorry, I'm getting passionate about this, but this is the message.
Please do not be sorry, John. On my podcast, if I can have some excitement and passion, I think that's sort of what also the world needs within reason, at least, because there's a lot of passion that's gone crazy bonkers out
Yes.
there. But this idea of reality, the way I look at it, and this is sort of how I feel like we've disengaged, is we've been talking about goodness before, and transcendental, and I feel like we've lost touch with beauty and truth,
Yes.
and have sort of put everything in the basket of goodness and forgot all about badness. And in the chasing and marketing of my goodness, look at me, I'm a hero, look at me, I did this, I'm on this
Ah,
cause, I'm existing through these other good things, and hopefully you'll think of me forever, and that creates my legacy, and maybe why not spend $640 billion on immortality, as we've come to believe we're allowed to. But reality includes, of course, suffering, pain, failure, and death. And our society, we in the me world, is trying to do everything to occult this part, or death anyway, in dialogue or in our conversation, in our existence, and everything else we try to take a pill to get rid of it.
yes.
And the hubris to think
Yes.
that we can cure death as if it were some kind of illness is, I mean, such an epitome of our complete loss of being in touch with reality.
That, wow, that's you're sparking so much in me. That was beautifully said. First of all, hubris. We have forgotten that for every Greek myth of heroism, as you mentioned, there is a Greek myth of hubris. And the reason for this, and this is one of Plato's great insights, and another one of his insight is above and beyond whatever what we want what we that satisfies our desires to be real, and we want it to integrate us, not fragment us and set us against ourselves. He has the third insight. Drew Highland brings this out, and this has to do with the hubris and the heroism in a proper tonos, the creative tension, which is Plato's argument is we have to hold together like with two hands, or like our stereoscopic vision, or our two fields that give us depth perception, our finitude and our transcendence. If we just get, so you see, our culture has severed these, and our culture vacillates between I'm just finite, I'm just an animal, I'm just significant, and there's nihilism and nihilism and nihilism. And then if you're just that, you're beset and you fall into servitude and manipulation. On the other side, I'll just be transcendent, right? Now, instead of falling prey to the tyrant, you become the tyrant. You become the narcissist. You inflate and inflate and inflate, and you try to escape the defining features of your finitude. You're going to escape into the cyber world, or you're going to escape to Mars, or you're going to put magnets in your fingers and chips in your head. Like, and all of this is like you're trying to escape from the limitations that are actually constitutive of your being like an agent in the world. Um, and what does that mean? What is going to be your relationship to the people who can't afford? Like, what is going to be your relationship to the people that can't afford all your transhumanistic machinery? What are you going to do with them? Well, you're going to be tyrannical over them, right? And well, not necessarily. Yeah, pretty much, right? You have to hold them together. You have to hold the the hero myth, yeah, your transcendence, but also the hubris myth, your finitude. Your transcendence will never and should never liberate you from your finitude. Your finitude should never cause you to despair and forget your capacity for transcendence. You hold them together in humility. And notice that we don't have a positive word for humility. Humiliation is purely negative in our culture. There's no positive sense of, I was humiliated and that was good.
Hmm. Beautiful. I feel like I wanted to take it on because you've mentioned this idea of dictatorship or the imposition of a strong-minded politician. It feels, and
Yep.
you know that saying that good times, uh, well, what is hard times create men, strong men create good times, and so on and so forth. Do
Yeah.
you does is that a quip that relate to, or do you think that's hokey pokey?
Um, I think it's a mistake. I mean, this is another Platonic proposal that we don't deliberately do evil. We do evil because we mistake a lesser good for a greater good. Um,
Mm,
uh, People who have no sense of good aren't evil in the typical sense. Depends whether or not you think somebody who's a true psychopath is evil or just horrifyingly amoral. And
mm,
we don't have to do that philosophical debate right now, but let's just say so strength is not itself a virtue. I think strength is a capacity to overcome obstacles, but it can be used for vice. Um, I think what people are meaning is uh, like I think they're meaning what virtue originally meant. Virtue was a power to orient and to realize the good, cognitively, in behavior, collectively, etc. That's virtue. Virtue is a power, a possibility. It still shows up in our idea of virtual reality. We're playing with powers and possibilities. Um, and I think what we mean is, and the problem is we've tended to equate virtue with meekness. This is also something of a misreading of Christianity that has entered into the culture, or victimhood. So those are the that's also we vacillate. No, those people are weak, right? And that's sort of the right? Oh, weak, 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 weak. And then the left is, oh, but they're so good because they're victims, they're victims, they're victims. And that's and again, I think that's because we've pulled apart, holding together the finite and the transcendent. Um, but what I think we really want is virtue, and virtue isn't meekness. It sometimes it might mean being meek. What virtue is the power to be wise in a way that belongs to, is meaningful to, fits the situation. So being wise here might be being kind. Being wise here might be being courageous. Being wise here, and this is Aristotle, might mean being angry at the right time to the right degree for the right reason. Like this is the notion, and I think what I would argue for is what we want we want virtue. We want good people living good lives that are models and exemplars and lead by being exemplary. And that we mistake that again for merely being a strong person, which I think is problematic. I think it's to there's a distinction in philosophy between the criterion and the goal. Criterion is something that helps you like get to you. It's a marker that you're moving towards your goal. So for example, you don't eat for pleasure. Pleasure is a criterion that you're eating something that is good. um, and now it might not be healthily good, but it might be filled with sugar and that's good for your brain and blah 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 blah, right? So I think strength is a criterion of virtue. Somebody who's virtuous is the capacity to be strong when strong means remaining true to what is good, what is true and good and beautiful. That's the kind of strength we're talking about. and it survives in the word virtuosity, right? That
Mm.
ability, oh, to so I think what we're after is virtue and virtuosity. And I think we rightly say we should follow people that we, you know, that we individually, collectively, and test of time in different contexts regard as being more virtuous and having more virtuosity. Simply being stronger, I mean, that I don't I don't so I think we're after something real, but we've misframed it.
Well, just to push back a second, John, the idea
Yeah.
of being a strong person, I get that. But I also feel like it's a little bit errant to be seeking or proposing to merely be a good person. Because if good is what we're after, then bad has no place. And I put a big quotient of reality in bad. In other words, if we strike from all persons all that is not good, therefore we are leaving out things like getting pain, suffering, old age, and death.
I think there's a difference here. I think there's a difference that I'm not making clear, and so I understand your pushback. And this again is a Nietzschean distinction. Those things are bad. I don't think they're vicious. Thinking them as vices that
Mm-hmm.
have to be eradicated is a mistake. They're bad in the sense that we don't have pleasure or enjoyment in them. But I don't think it is vicious to suffer. I think it is vicious to willingly suffer for no good reason. I think that's why like sadism and cruelty are wrong. But I mean, I intended to suffer on the pilgrimage because I think that suffering was good. Was it good? I mean, this is the problem with the word good. Is it good in the sense of virtuous or good in the sense of pleasant and pleasing? Well, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't pleasant and pleasing. It was often arduous and painful, and I got sick. Do I regret it? No, because I think it was virtuous. So that's part of the distinction I would want to make. I think there's a lot of confusion. There's confusion on both sides. That's what I'm saying. We're confusing strength with virtue or pleasantness with virtue, and
Mm-hmm.
we're confusing things that are unpleasant and painful with vice. They're not. We have to be willing to I think I'm agreeing with you. Tell me if I'm not.
I
But we
love
have
it.
to,
No, I'm good with you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think we have to be, what I hear you saying, to use some of my language, is part of what we call bad is those criteria that tell us we're finite, and we have to listen to them on a regular basis. That's what I hear you saying, and I'm in
Amen.
absolute agreement with that.
Amen. Well said, John. Just in the last space, I like to spend a little bit of time talking about psychedelics. I've
Sure.
had I've had many psychonauts and specialists and PhDs and doctors in all the amazing research that's being done in psychedelics. I'm more just a pastime, having fun, and I've observed and I feel that psychedelics has been a tremendous part of my exploration of meaningfulness and my smallness in the universe and a few other things. And in your book, I kept on thinking so in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, where you really plunge into the history of how we got into this sense or this meaning crisis that we are continuously living today. I was expecting you to have a section about the Kukion, the former uh, psychedelic mixture that is believed to have existed as the immortality key, the key immortality key.
Yeah, I just felt
Murorescu,
yeah.
Brian Murorescu, and the
Yeah, I've
Kukion.
met him. We've had a good conversation. He likes my work too.
Well, I
You're talking,
bet he does.
yeah, yeah. I didn't talk about it specifically because I mean, I tried to talk about it as a continuous theme, right? So you have shamanism, and then you have higher states of consciousness. And I was talking mystical experiences, and I talked about that. I also have a lot of online videos and publications I'm working on right now around psychedelics. Um, uh, I think the psychedelic renaissance is again a symptom of the meaning crisis. People are trying to they're trying to find a way to wake up. They're trying to find a way of challenging systemic and systematic bias that they in their normal states they can't see because it's so automatic, like my glasses I'm wearing. um uh, I agree. I think there's dangers, and more of the research is now pointing out to that what we're doing in psychedelics is we're putting ourselves into a state of what's called epistemic vulnerability. These are states. I'm being persuaded. I'm not totally convinced, but I'm finding it plausible that the evolutionary functions of these states, which we can endogenously induce without chemical substances, we can do other
Mm.
things. Um,
Breathing or
yeah. That what they are is that they are states that are states of rapid, in which rapid learning, rapid deep learning is available to us. So they're called states of epistemic vulnerability, which I'd love to have that on a T-shirt. I'm in a state of epistemic vulnerability.
someone should make that for you, John.
um, and so what that means is what they do is they are tremendous, like they're a tremendous opportunity for learning, and for something even more, for learning to learn, not just evolving a new trait, but evolving your evolvability itself. And I think this is really crucial. But like a state of vulnerability is exactly that. It's a state that can be like, so I'm worried, and I'm not accusing anybody. I'm stating a concern, and because I do research on this, right? I'm worried for that. I'm worried about the magic pill attitude that you criticized earlier about psychedelics, right?
Mm.
That we're disembedding them from how they have been used cross-culturally, cross-historically, indigenously, which is okay, set and setting. Those are not enough. You need sapiential practices. You need to be doing a lot of other practices so that you don't go down rabbit.
Sorry, folks. I think we have a little station identity break, and hopefully John will reappear. So, John, our time is of the essence, and I always like to have an on-time departure. You're a busy man doing a lot of great work. Carry on doing all that. Where can somebody get in touch with you, follow your readings, sign up for your courses, buy your books? Where's the volumes of John Vervaeke?
Oh, well, the book is available on Amazon. The books, that and the book on AI, mentoring the machines, and the book on the zombie myth as the myth of the meaning crisis is also there. Um, just go on my YouTube channel. You can sign up. You can get in contact with the Vervaeke Foundation. You can join the Lectern, which is my online platform for. There's free videos. You can also take courses with me. The courses are not free. I put out hundreds of hours of free content, but if you want to like take an 8-week course, uh, uh, there you can do that. Have one running right now. You just Google Scholar me for all my academic work. Um, yeah, and but the YouTube channel is probably the best place to get a start. Although I would recommend, if you're watching Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, that you read the book. If you say, well, I can only do one, then read the book rather than listen to the video series, because I think the book is better. But if you can do both, do both.
Well, for having done both, I would agree. The book is a great read. John, many, many thanks. Keep up the good work, and I hope to see you maybe on your trip to Cambridge.
Yeah, I'm hoping to come to London, and hopefully we can grab a meal together, Minter. Thank you. This has been a great time. Sorry about the signal dropping. Sorry about that.
All
Technology is the
good.
god that limps. So
Indeed,
uh,
it is. But it was fun dialoguing with you, John.
very much. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you so much.